going across the fence. Now, by 1970, there wasn't a whole lot of that going on. They had what was called Vietnamization. Nixon ran against on a platform of winding down the Vietnam War. So we were sending lots of troops home, and there wasn't near as much SOG activity as there had been. But we'd still go across the fence now and then. And when you go across the fence, it was a little different in that, a little silly or stupid if you ask me. We had to go sterile, so no dog tags, no wallets, no pictures of your wife or girlfriend, no letters, nothing on you to identify who you were, as if you're going to fool somebody that you're not an American. I mean, I don't know how that's going to. If you get shot down, you crash. Here's this, or if I get captured, I'm a round-eyed white guy and I don't speak Vietnamese or Lao, and I'm supposed to say what I'm really Vietnamese. It seems kind of stupid to me, but anyhow, that's what we had to do. You had to go sterile, and then we get briefs with the special operators, the SOG guys, launch and go across the border. Most of the stuff that I did by 1970 was a resupply on a radio relay operation we had going on across the border on a hilltop. But then came in September of 70, we got orders to go down to what's called 2 Corps. Vietnam was divided into 4 corps, 1, 2, 3, 4 Roman numerals. And that was in the Central Highlands, and we were going down to work with the Army, which is really a kind of an odd situation because we always stayed in our area of operation. And this became background. The Ho Chi Minh Trail is where the North Vietnamese brought all their people down to infiltrate into South Vietnam to support the insurgency. They were also fighting the governments in Laos and Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge and the insurgents in Laos also. Khmer Rouge, they were called. Khmer Rouge and whatever the hell they were. Anyhow, that was the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It started out as basically in 1959 as just a trail. This has been going on for a long time. But by 1970, it was kind of an engineering marvel. They had gravel roads that you could drive trucks on. They would build bridges maybe like a foot below the water crossing a creek. They'd build the bridge so you couldn't see it from the air, but trucks could go across. They'd clear a roadway, and then they'd climb the trees and rope together the canopy so it covered everything. They had 6 different pipelines carrying diesel and gasoline, and they had telecommunication lines. It was a sophisticated thing, and it wasn't just one road. It was a whole network to go for the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was a big thing. Well, what happened back in, I think it was 65, the U.S. kind of got asked to leave, got thrown out of Cambodia. Both the governments of Laos and Cambodia were walking a tightrope saying, oh, we have diplomatic relations with North and South Vietnam. We're not pro either one. We're maintaining neutrality. But it was all just a front because we weren't there. The North Vietnamese say they weren't there, but by 1970, they had somewhere close to 90,000 troops in Laos defending the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and we would send people in all the time, but everybody said they weren't there. So what happened, the leader of South Vietnam the leader of Cambodia opened up Cambodia to the North Vietnamese communists. And they built another trail system called the Sihanouk Trail. Well, 70% of all the supplies, not the people, but the supplies for the war in Vietnam came by a ship all the way around the country in international waters, would go into Port Sihanoukville and use the Sihanouk Trail. That's where that 70% of all the heavy stuff came. Well, Prince Sihanouk was overthrown, and all of a sudden that was shut off, the Sihanouk Trail. So the communists, the NVA, had to press westward from where the Ho Chi Minh Trail was, go to the west so they could get control of what was called the Mekong River, which flowed into the Mekong River, and then they would use the waterway as their new supply for heavy equipment. And the CIA had a whole bunch of outposts overlooking the Mekong, and the NVA overran those and took control of it. So back in the White House, Henry Kissinger and this group he had came up with an idea for a big operation, and it was called Operation Gauntlet. It was 5,700 mercenaries led by the CIA to recapture all these CIA sites so they could have control of the Mekong River. And then they needed some help from the military. We needed to provide a diversion and a blocking force so people from the Ho Chi Minh Trail couldn't get over. So generally, SOG was always limited to operating within 20 clicks of the border, 20 kilometers. And it couldn't go any deeper than that. So this was a kind of special mission. It was, we got permission to go deeper into Laos, and it was going to be instead of a small recon team like most of these guys you've probably listened to, where you have 2 or 3 Americans and a few Montagnards. This was going to be 120 Montagnards and 16 Green Berets. It was a company-size operation, and it became known as Operation Tailwind. So we were supposed to put them in on September 4th, and the weather was bad. So we waited till the 7th and went down on the 7th, and we got the brief, and we spent the night there. And then after the next morning, we went out. The plan was to pontoons in the Central Highlands, and we would load up and go out to another base that was outlying near the border called Dak To. It was just a small patch of scraped earth with some bunkers and stuff, and we'd go to Dak To, wait for the weather to break so we could make it across the border into Laos. So we went to Dak To, and we sat there, and we sat and sat and sat for hours, and overstayed our welcome. And you don't have any of the pictures, so I'm kind of describing something. I wish you could see it, but I was on the roof of a bunker catching some rays with a guy named Pat Owen, and we're sitting there, you know, looking around, and all of a sudden, all these mortars start going off. So we jumped down, and we went into this bunker, and I took a picture, which is, you know, I wonder. Anyhow, it's on the. I don't know if you can see it. It's on the cover of the book. Mm-hmm. Well, I took that picture, and I had these slides for 50 years. And if some buddies would come by, you know, every 5 years or something, might break them out and we'd look at them. I suppose I looked at them 5 or 6 times in 50 years and never noticed. But on the picture, there's this guy running along the fence, and never noticed it till I start researching and writing this book, and I got contacted by this one guy who was a Pink Panther, and his name's Pete Gotch, and he says, I'm in that slide, and I looked, and by God, there he was. So I used that on the cover of the book. But anyhow, the one Army Cobra got blown apart, and we all ran and got in our birds and launched, and couldn't find the bad guys, and we had to cancel the mission for the day. We had another bird that was damaged. We had to external it back, hoist it under a PH-53. It was battle damaged, and you know, we're going to try the next day. This was the 8th, so we were going to. Next day, the weather was bad. We had gone back to Marble Mountain, and then it was the 9th, and the weather's still bad. We couldn't get in. So then on the 10th, they called us, said we're going to go on the 11th, and we went down there. In the morning of the 11th, we loaded up again, went out to Dak To, and this time the weather was sufficient. We could get in. Now, the thing you got to remember, in the monsoon seasons, it rains for about 6 months, and that panhandle of Laos gets from 120 to 140 inches of rain in the wet season. Now, that's our annual, but there's a dry season and a wet season. Most of it comes in the wet season. So you have low clouds, and it's mountainous. So that's why, as much as you'd like to go, sometimes the weather's just too bad and we couldn't get in. So finally, on the 11th, we went to Dak To. there was a covey bird. I don't know if you've heard that term before. It's an Air Force forward air controller, and in his front seat would be an experienced SOG, special forces guy, and he'd be talking to the grunts on the ground, and the controller, the FAC covey would be talking to the fast movers or whoever, or other aviation assets. Anyhow, they said the weather's sufficient, we can come in, and we started flying, and it was we usually try to stay at 1,500 feet to stay above small arms fire, and you just fly along at 1,500 feet, but the weather was down, so we had to get lower and lower. And of course, every once in a while, people are shooting at you and tracers come up. Well, 2 or 3 yards got hit just en route. We hadn't even started the mission yet, and they couldn't offload because they were wounded. But the Pathfinder team, some guys went in the Hueys. I think there were 7, maybe 3 SF guys and 4 Indige. And they landed and they said, quiet as a church, no problem, bring them on in. So we had CH-53s, which are a big Marine transport helicopter. And we had the troops on 4 53s. And then we had 6 birds altogether at the time, 6 53s. 2 were search and rescue SAR in case somebody gets shot down. So the first one comes in, everything's supposed to be quiet as a church. First one comes in and the place opens up. They didn't shoot at the Pathfinders, but the hills are alive with all these people shooting at us. And it turned into a shit sandwich. Then the second one came in and unloaded his packs, and the third and the fourth, and it got heavier and heavier with each one. Everybody gets shot up. We got our radio shot out and some other stuff, and my friend Joe, same thing with them. So we had 4 Cobras, and 2 of them were without radios. But anyhow, we left, and Gene McCarley, who was Captain Gene McCarley, was the commander of B Company, the SOG hatchet force. He said when we left, he said, the jungle just got quiet as a mouse, quiet as a church again. He said they were kind of on the hills, and we landed in an open area, and they were shooting everything they had. But SOG's mission, or their game plan then, Gene McCarley's tactics, was to be a game of cat and mouse. And he was going to keep his troops moving, and the NBA were trying to catch him. So they didn't know where he was going, and it was a cat and mouse situation. It worked okay. They went about 500 yards, and on day 1, on the 11th, they came upon this bunker complex. And they enter this bunker complex, and it's like a storage. There's 25 bunkers lined up, and it's full of ammunition, rockets, 23 millimeter ammunition, and mortars, and everything else. There's whole bunker is loaded with it. There's a bunker of bicycles. There's one's an office, and I think it was 1st Platoon goes in on the hatchet force, and they go into this one bunker, and the phone rings, and I think it was Craig Schmidt, an SF guy. So the story goes, he picks up the phone and says, "Hello, good afternoon, 5th Special Forces Group." He hung up on the other end. That didn't go so well, but there was a picture of Ho Chi Minh on the wall that Schmidt took, and then they got their demo guys, and they wired up all 20 or 25 bunkers, whatever they were, with det cord and plastic explosives. Put a 15-minute timer on it, and they started heading out, and it started blowing, and they said that like 6 hours later, they were still getting explosions going off in the area. So that got the NVA's attention and kind of pissed them off about a bit. The one problem that the hatchet force ran into is that they were taking casualties. There was a RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, landed in a bamboo thicket right next to Gene McCarley, and his medic was a guy named Mike Rose, Sergeant Mike Rose, and there were some other guys. It blew up and threw them up in the air and wounded them and gave them bamboo shrapnel and everything. And there were some yards that were wounded, and Mike and the second platoon was in charge of all the casualties, and it was slowing them down. So they had one dead, and then the next day they had a second KIA. And when you're playing a game of cat and mouse, you have to be mobile and you have to be able to move. And it was really slowing them down. So Mike made the decision he had to leave two bodies behind, 2 yards. That really bothered him. But then he also had 2 litter patients. They got ponchos and used bamboo and made litters, and they had to carry them. So the hatchet force, B Company, was being slowed quite a bit. Meanwhile, the word had gotten out that the Americans were there, and coming down the highway, they start bringing in reinforcements. There were trucks coming down. You couldn't, we weren't out there to shoot them. The Air Force would try, but the weather was too bad. So reinforcements were coming in. So the cat was getting bigger and the mouse was getting slower. So on the 12th, the next day, the Army decided they were going to try to get those 2 litter patients extracted and the worst of the walking wounded. They could run a medevac and get them out of there. So they went in and they had some Pink Panther Cobras and some Bikini Hueys. And you've had some, I know Bud's had some Pink Panther guys on, Woody Woodard, I believe. But anyhow, they went to tried to go in and had a Panther leading the way, and it was Major Henry was their new CO, who was in the front seat because he had just gotten there and was wanting to learn the neighborhood. And I forget the guy's name in the back seat. Anyhow, they're leading the Huey in, and they get shot down. So then the medevac's off, and it's an air crew rescue mission. So a guy named Bob Litwinski with bikinis came in and pulled them out of there. So that didn't work so well. Meanwhile, the hatchet force is running out of food and ammunition. Water, you had your iodine tablets. You could get some river water and throw a few tablets in and drink it and spit out the chunks. You were okay. But they're running low on ammo and food. And Mike Rose was getting covered up. By then he had a couple of dozen wounded, and half of the Americans were wounded or more. So things were getting bad. So then the next day, the 12th, on the 12th, they went to an RON site. RON means remain overnight. So you're looking for a place where you can spend the night. They just call it an RON site. They found this place that was kind of an open area with a bomb crater in the middle. Mike put his wounded in the bomb crater, his worst wounded, and he's trying to set up IVs and do stuff like that. Meanwhile, in the woods surrounding it is where everyone else is positioned. So the enemy doesn't know exactly where the hatchet force is, and they launch a grenade attack, but they don't know exactly where it is. So these guys come walking through the jungle, and they would beat 2 bamboo, whoever's in charge would beat 2 bamboo sticks together. Bang it once, that means move forward. Then you bang it twice, it means throw your grenade, and then bang it 3 times, and it means turn around and go back. Well, no one's going to fire a weapon because the muzzle flash would give away your position. So even though it's just 3 days from a full moon, it's black as a well digger's ass because it's a monsoon season with thick overcast and a triple canopy jungle out where these guys are. So they're in the utter darkness. They come throw it. Well, the special forces and the yards are there, and they'd hear them coming, and they'd throw grenades that way. And this grenade battle broke out, but nobody would fire their weapon because they didn't want to give away a position. Well, it went on most of the night. Then it stopped, and they heard trucks coming. They could hear them unloading crates. They were getting resupplied with more grenades, and then the NVA comes again. And there's a break in the action, and there's one, this is a little side story. A guy named Jimmy Lucas, I think he was a sergeant, Jimmy Lucas. His call sign, or they called them code names, was Little Caesar. He's a short guy, and he decides he's going to snatch himself an NVA prisoner. So this is just pitch blackness. No one knows where anybody else, but he crawls out of his foxhole and he's sticking his hand out in front of him, feeling as he's silently crawling. He goes a little bit and then he feels something and it's an arm. He says, oh, I got one. So he starts pulling on this arm to drag this body back, and the guy's moaning a little, so he's wounded. He starts pulling him back, and all of a sudden, someone grabs the leg on the other end and pulls it in the other direction. So here's these guys, they're like 5 feet apart, and you can't see anything. It's pitch blackness. And Lucas says, I think maybe discretion is the better part of valor. And he lets go and he slithers back to his foxhole. But I mean, what a crazy thing to do, but a great